Imagine standing in the middle of a scorching 120-degree desert, 2,000 years before the invention of the light bulb, and someone hands you a bowl of frozen ice. Not a dream, not a trick, just a Tuesday in the Persian Empire. While the rest of the ancient world was sweating through their linen and praying for shade, the Persians had already cracked one of nature's toughest codes. They built ice factories in the middle of the desert, with mud and wind and the night sky. That's it. No engines, no electricity, no refrigerant. Just raw, brilliant science dressed up as architecture. And it worked so well that some of these structures stood for centuries without ever needing a single upgrade. These are the yakchols. And once you understand how they worked, you'll never look at a modern fridge the same way again. The word yakchal literally means ice pit in Persian, and that name tells you almost everything. But the structure itself, that tells you something far more impressive. From the outside, a yakchal looks like a giant beehive rising out of the desert floor. Some of them stretched up to 60 feet tall, taller than a 5-story building, built from nothing but mud brick and a special mortar the Persians called saruj. This wasn't your average clay paste. Saruj was a precise, almost obsessive recipe. Media group animation or diagram overlay of saruj, ingredients being mixed, close-up of hands mixing clay, sand and ash, ancient Persian workers preparing saruj, mortari stock are distributed equally, sand, clay, lime, egg whites, goat hair and ash, all mixed together into a compound so thermally resistant that modern concrete engineers have studied it with genuine envy. The walls at the base were often 6 feet thick. 6 feet. That's not a wall, that's a fortress against heat. The tall conical shape wasn't just for looks either. It was a physics engine. Warm air, being lighter, naturally rises. So the dome acted like a chimney, pulling heat upward and venting it out through a small opening at the very top. The base of the structure, where the ice actually lived, stayed dark, sealed and cold. It was passive air conditioning built into the shape of a building, designed by people who had never once heard the word thermodynamics, but understood it on a bone-deep level. Below the dome sat the real magic, a massive underground pit, sometimes large enough to hold thousands of cubic feet of ice. Buried beneath the surface, surrounded by earth that barely changed temperature regardless of the season, this subterranean chamber created the kind of stable, cold environment that modern cold storage engineers still chase after today. But here's the question that stops most people cold. Pun intended. Where did the ice come from in the first place? This is where the Persians showed just how far ahead they were thinking. They didn't just store ice, they manufactured it. During the winter months, workers would channel water through a system of underground aqueducts called qanats, one of the ancient world's most sophisticated feats of civil engineering in its own right, directing it into wide, shallow pools built in the shadow of a long east-west wall. That wall was critical. It was built tall and positioned specifically to block the low winter sun from hitting the water during the day. The pools stayed shaded, the water stayed still, and at night something remarkable happened. In the desert, the nights are brutally cold and the skies are achingly clear. That clear sky acts as what physicists today call a radiative heat sink, meaning heat from the surface of the water radiates directly upward into the atmosphere and out into space. The water doesn't need the air temperature to drop below freezing. It loses heat so fast into that open, cloudless sky that it freezes even when the air around it is still technically above zero. By the time the sun came back up, the pools had turned to sheets of ice, sometimes several inches thick. Workers moved fast before the warmth returned. They cracked the ice into blocks, hauled them across the desert floor, and packed them down into the underground chambers, often layering them with straw to slow any melting. Once sealed inside the yakchal, those blocks could survive the summer. In the Iranian plateau, where surface temperatures routinely hit 104 degrees Fahrenheit or more. The dome kept the heat out, the earth kept the base cold, but the Persians didn't stop there. They added a third layer of engineering that made the whole system run like a machine. Many yakhchals were built alongside badgirs, wind catchers. These were tall, tower-like structures with open vents designed to catch even the faintest desert breeze and funnel it downward into the cooling chamber. The air moving over the damp, cold surfaces inside caused evaporative cooling, the same principle that makes you feel cold when you step out of a swimming pool on a windy day. The wind stole heat from the air inside the chamber and carried it away, keeping temperatures well below what the surrounding desert was doing. And the natural convection loop created by the difference between cold air at the bottom and warm air at the top kept that circulation going constantly, even on still days. The system fed itself. What the Persians built was, in every real sense of the word, a refrigerator, a passive, self-sustaining, zero-emission refrigerator that required no fuel, produced no waste, and cost nothing to run once it was built. Inside those cooled chambers, the empire stored fresh fruit, chilled wine dairy, and meat, luxuries that would have rotted within hours under the open desert sun. And then there was falude, a frozen Persian dessert made from rosewater, fruit syrups, and thin noodles frozen and served to the wealthy elite of the empire as a treat. Ice cream in 400 BCE in the desert. Let that sink in. Here's the part of this story that, well, hits differently in today's world. The yakhchal wasn't just clever for its time. It's actually becoming relevant again right now. As energy costs rise, as climate change pushes temperatures into new extremes, and as off-grid living becomes both a survival strategy and, a lifestyle choice, engineers and architects around the world are going back to the yakhchal blueprint. Research teams in Iran, Europe, and the Middle East are studying these structures as models for sustainable, low-cost food storage in hot, arid regions, exactly the kind of regions that will bear the harshest brunt of a warming planet. Some of the original yakhchals still stand today, not as ruins but as remarkably intact structures, built from natural materials, requiring almost no maintenance, carbon footprint so close to zero it barely registers, and still, after 2,000 years, architecturally sound. The Persians didn't just solve a problem, they solved it in a way that was so elegant, so in tune with the natural world, that we are still trying to catch up to it. Survival has never been about brute force. It has never been about having the biggest weapon, the loudest engine, or the most advanced technology. The greatest survivors in history, in battle, in wilderness, in civilizations clinging to impossible geography, all shared the same core trait. They looked at what their environment was already doing and figured out how to use it. The Persians looked at the desert and didn't see an enemy. They saw a temperature swing between day and night, and they built a machine around it. They saw wind and they caught it. They saw the night sky and they used it as a heat drain. They didn't fight the desert, they collaborated with it. That's the lesson, not just for survival in the wild, but for life. The most powerful tool you will ever have is the ability to look at a hard situation and ask, what is this environment already giving me that I haven't used yet? 2,000 years ago, a Persian engineer stood in the middle of one of the hottest places on Earth and decided to build a freezer. And it worked. What's your dessert and what are you building? If this got your brain firing, hit that like button and share this with someone who still thinks ancient people were primitive. Subscribe to The Survival Historian, because history isn't just the past. It's the most powerful survival manual ever written.